The morning
It's a
sun
pleasure to
cast
meet you.
long
The pleasure
shadows
is mine,
across
Your
the
Majesty.
manicured gardens
I
of
look forward to
Buckingham
our
Palace
discussion.
as staff members hurried through final preparations. Today would mark a significant moment in diplomatic history. King Charles III was hosting an unprecedented gathering that would bring together political leaders, artists, writers, musicians, and cultural ambassadors from across the Western Balkans. The event represented months of careful planning and diplomatic coordination designed to strengthen ties between the United Kingdom and a region that had experienced decades of transformation. Margaret Thornton, the palace's chief protocol officer, reviewed her checklist for the third time that morning. With over 20 years of experience organizing state functions, she understood the delicate balance required when bringing together representatives from countries with complex histories. The guest list included presidents, prime ministers, acclaimed filmmakers, renowned authors, celebrated musicians, and influential cultural figures from Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, Kosovo, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Serbia. The king himself had been deeply involved in planning this event. His long-standing interest in interfaith dialogue, cultural preservation, and post-conflict reconciliation made this gathering particularly meaningful to him. Charles had spent considerable time studying the region's history, from the rich Byzantine and Ottoman heritage to the more recent challenges of the 1990s conflicts and subsequent nation-building efforts. As the first guests began arriving at the palace gates, the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. The event was structured as both a formal reception and an interactive cultural showcase, allowing for meaningful exchanges between the British royal family and their distinguished visitors. The day would feature presentations of traditional music, discussions about contemporary art movements, and conversations about the evolving political landscape of Southeast Europe. President Vjosa Osmani of Kosovo arrived first, accompanied by a small delegation that included the country's most celebrated contemporary artist, Petar Halilaj. Known for his installations that explore themes of memory, displacement, and hope, Halilaj had been invited to discuss how art could bridge cultural divides. His presence represented the new generation of Kosovar creatives who were gaining international recognition while remaining deeply connected to their homeland story. The Albanian delegation followed shortly after, led by Prime Minister Edi Rama, who was himself an accomplished artist before entering politics. His unique background as both a political leader and creative professional made him an ideal participant in this cross-cultural dialogue. Accompanying him was renowned Albanian soprano Ermanila Jaho, whose performances at major opera houses worldwide had brought Albanian culture to global audiences. From Bosnia and Herzegovina came a diverse group representing the country's multi-ethnic composition. President Shefik Javarovic was joined by acclaimed filmmaker Jasmila Zbanic, whose work exploring women's experiences during and after conflict had earned international acclaim. Also present was Goran Bregovic, the legendary composer whose music had become synonymous with Balkan culture worldwide, transcending ethnic and national boundaries through its universal appeal. The Croatian delegation included President Zoran Milanovic and celebrated author Dubravka Ugrizic, whose novels and essays had examined the complexities of post-Yugoslav identity. Her literary work, translated into dozens of languages, offered profound insights into the experience of cultural transition and the search for belonging in a rapidly changing world. From Montenegro, President Milo Đukanović arrived with filmmaker and actor Danilo Shërbegjia, son of the famous actor Rade Shërbegjia. The younger Shërbegjia had carved out his own reputation as a storyteller exploring themes of tradition and modernity in contemporary Balkan society. North Macedonia's delegation was headed by President Stevo Pendarovski, accompanied by world-renowned opera singer Boris Trajanov and contemporary artist Zaneta Vangeli, whose work examining gender and identity had gained recognition across European galleries. The Serbian delegation presented perhaps the most complex diplomatic challenge, given the ongoing tensions with some neighboring countries. President Aleksandar Vučić was accompanied by internationally acclaimed filmmaker Emir Kusturica and classical music conductor Uroš Lajović. Their inclusion demonstrated the event's focus on cultural dialogue rather than political divisions. As each delegation was formally received by King Charles and Queen Camilla, the monarch's genuine interest in each representative became evident. Charles had prepared extensively for these meetings, familiarizing himself not only with each leader's political background, but also with the cultural figure's artistic contributions. His conversations revealed a deep appreciation for the region's complex history and its rich cultural traditions. The formal reception began in the palace's magnificent ballroom, where Charles delivered opening remarks that set the tone for the day's proceedings. His speech acknowledged the challenges the region had faced while celebrating the remarkable resilience and creativity that had emerged from those experiences. The king spoke about the importance of cultural exchange in building understanding between nations and peoples, emphasizing how art, literature, and music could transcend political boundaries. Following the formal welcome, guests moved to the blue drawing room for a series of intimate discussions. The format was deliberately informal, encouraging natural conversations between participants who might not otherwise have the opportunity to interact. British cultural figures, including authors, musicians, and artists, mingled with their Balkan counterparts, creating unexpected connections and collaborative possibilities. One particularly engaging conversation developed between Dubravka Ugrizic and British novelist Ian McEwan, who found common ground in their exploration of how individual stories reflect broader historical movements. Their discussion about the responsibility of writers to bear witness to their times resonated with other attendees, sparking broader conversations about the role of art in processing collective trauma and imagining hopeful futures. Meanwhile, Goran Bregovic found himself in animated discussion with British composer Max Richter about the intersection of traditional folk music and contemporary classical composition. Their exchange explored how ancient musical traditions could be preserved while remaining relevant to modern audiences, a challenge faced by musicians worldwide, but particularly acute in regions experiencing rapid cultural change. The visual artists present engaged in equally stimulating conversations. Petrit Halalaj's installations, which often incorporated elements from his childhood memories of refugee camps and subsequent return to Kosovo, resonated with British artists who had explored themes of displacement and belonging in their own work. His approach to transforming personal trauma into universal artistic statements provided insights into the healing potential of creative expression. As the morning progressed, it became clear that this gathering was achieving something unique. Rather than the formal diplomatic exchanges typical of state visits, genuine connections were forming between individuals who shared creative passions despite vastly different cultural backgrounds. The king moved freely among his guests, facilitating introductions and encouraging the kinds of spontaneous interactions that could lead to lasting collaborations. Queen Camilla, known for her literacy advocacy, found particular connection with the writers present. Her conversation with Jasmine Lisbanik about women's stories and experiences revealed shared concerns about ensuring that female voices were heard and preserved in historical narratives. Their discussion touched on the importance of supporting emerging female writers and filmmakers across all cultures. The palace staff had arranged for several spaces throughout the building to accommodate different types of interactions. The music room hosted impromptu performances, where traditional Balkan melodies blended with classical pieces familiar to British audiences. These musical exchanges demonstrated how cultural understanding could develop through shared artistic experience rather than formal presentations. In the picture gallery, visual artists examined works from the royal collection while discussing their own approaches to representing cultural identity and historical memory. The juxtaposition of centuries-old royal portraits with contemporary perspectives on power and representation sparked fascinating conversations about how artistic traditions evolved while maintaining their essential character. The Green Drawing Room became a hub for political and cultural leaders to discuss practical collaboration opportunities. Conversations ranged from student exchange programs to joint cultural festivals, from academic partnerships to shared museum exhibitions. The informal setting encouraged creative thinking about how cultural diplomacy could complement traditional political and economic ties. As lunch approached, the energy in the palace remained high. The morning's interactions had generated numerous ideas for future collaboration, from artistic residencies to educational partnerships. The king's vision of using cultural connections to strengthen international relationships was clearly resonating with his guests. The success of the morning sessions reflected careful attention to both protocol requirements and the need for genuine cultural exchange. By bringing together political leaders with artists and intellectuals, the event created opportunities for multifaceted relationships that extended beyond traditional diplomatic channels. The Western Balkan representatives were clearly energized by the opportunity to share their cultural achievements with both the royal family and British creative communities. The preparation for this gathering had involved extensive consultation with cultural experts from each represented country. Palace staff had worked to ensure that dietary requirements, religious considerations, and cultural sensitivities were all properly addressed. This attention to detail demonstrated respect for the diverse backgrounds of the attendees, while creating an environment where meaningful exchanges could occur naturally. The morning's success also reflected the king's personal commitment to understanding the region. His preparation had included studying recent artistic and literary works from each country, familiarizing himself with contemporary political developments, and consulting with experts on Balkan history and culture. This preparation enabled him to engage authentically with each representative, moving beyond superficial pleasantries to substantive discussions about their work and its broader significance. As the first part of the day concluded, it was clear that something significant was developing. The connections being formed between British and Balkan cultural figures suggested possibilities for long-term collaboration that could benefit both regions. The political leaders present were witnessing firsthand how cultural diplomacy could complement their efforts to strengthen international relationships and promote understanding between their peoples. The afternoon program began with a private luncheon in the 1844 room, where the intimate setting allowed for deeper conversations between smaller groups of participants. King Charles had specifically requested roundtables rather than the traditional long table format, encouraging cross-cultural dialogue among guests who might not otherwise interact. The carefully orchestrated seating arrangements paired political leaders with artists, ensuring that discussions would blend policy considerations with creative perspectives. At one table, President Milanovic of Croatia found himself engaged in passionate discussion with British filmmaker Ken Loach about the role of cinema in documenting social change. Their conversation explored how film could capture the human dimension of political transformation, with Milanovic sharing insights from Croatia's transition to independence and Loach reflecting on his decades of socially conscious filmmaking. Jasmine Lisbanek contributed her perspective on how female filmmakers approached conflict narratives differently, emphasizing personal stories over grand political themes. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Rama of Albania drew upon his artistic background to discuss with British sculptor Anthony Gormley the challenges of balancing creative expression with public service. Their exchange revealed fascinating parallels between artistic creation and political leadership, both requiring vision, persistence, and the ability to inspire others towards shared goals. Rama's unique position as both artist and politician provided rare insights into how creative thinking could inform governance. The musical collaborations that had begun spontaneously in the morning continued during lunch, with Ermanila Jaho and Boris Trajanov discussing the challenges of maintaining cultural authenticity while reaching international audiences. Their conversation attracted the attention of British classical musicians present, leading to impromptu discussions about cross-cultural musical fusion and the preservation of traditional vocal techniques in contemporary performance. King Charles moved between tables, demonstrating his remarkable ability to connect with each guest on topics close to their expertise and passion. His conversation with Goran Bregovic revealed the monarch's deep appreciation for how music could transcend cultural and linguistic barriers. They discussed the healing power of music in post-conflict societies, with Bregovic sharing stories of concerts that brought together audiences from different ethnic backgrounds for the first time after years of division. The King's interaction with Petra Halalaj proved particularly moving, as the artist explained how his installations incorporated objects and memories from his childhood displacement during the Kosovo conflict. Charles listened intently as Halalaj described transforming painful experiences into art that celebrated resilience and hope. Their conversation touched on the broader question of how societies could process collective trauma while building positive futures. Queen Camilla's literary discussions continued during lunch, with Dubravka Ugrizic sharing insights about the challenges faced by writers from smaller nations in reaching global audiences. Their conversation explored how literature could preserve cultural identity while addressing universal human experiences. The Queen's genuine interest in supporting literary voices from diverse backgrounds led to discussions about potential collaboration between British and Balkan literary organizations. The afternoon's formal program resumed in the palace's throne room, where presentations showcased contemporary cultural achievements from across the Western Balkans. Rather than traditional performances, the format encouraged interactive demonstrations that engaged all attendees. Zaneta Vangeli presented examples of her multimedia installations exploring gender and identity in post-socialist societies, sparking discussions about how art could address social transformation. Danilo Sherbagia screened excerpts from his recent documentary work examining how younger generations in Montenegro balance traditional values with contemporary aspirations. His film clips generated thoughtful discussions about generational change throughout the region and similarities with social developments in other European countries. The screening created opportunities for British and Balkan young people to share perspectives on navigating cultural expectations while pursuing personal goals. The musical presentations took an innovative approach, with traditional Balkan instruments demonstrated alongside contemporary arrangements. Uroš Lajović conducted an impromptu ensemble that included both Balkan folk musicians and British classical players, creating unique musical fusions that embodied the day's spirit of cultural collaboration. The resulting performances suggested possibilities for formal musical exchange programs between institutions in both regions. As the afternoon progressed, working groups formed naturally around specific collaboration interests. Education emerged as a primary focus, with discussions about student exchange programs, joint research projects, and shared academic conferences. The political leaders present recognized how educational partnerships could strengthen long-term relationships between their countries and the United Kingdom while providing young people with broader cultural perspectives. Cultural tourism became another significant discussion topic, with representatives exploring how to promote responsible travel that supported local communities while sharing authentic cultural experiences. The conversations revealed sophisticated understanding of tourism's potential benefits and risks, with emphasis on preserving cultural authenticity while providing economic opportunities for local artists and cultural practitioners. The afternoon sessions also addressed practical challenges facing cultural organizations throughout the region. Funding constraints, audience development, and international marketing emerged as common concerns shared by cultural institutions across all represented countries. British cultural leaders shared experiences and strategies, while their Balkan counterparts offered insights into creative solutions developed in resource-constrained environments. One particularly productive discussion centered on digital cultural preservation and sharing. The representatives explored how technology could help preserve traditional cultural practices while making them accessible to global audiences. Young artists present contributed valuable perspectives on using social media and digital platforms to connect with diaspora communities and build international appreciation for their cultural traditions. The conversations revealed remarkable innovation occurring throughout the Western Balkans, often in response to limited resources. Artists and cultural organizations had developed creative approaches to funding, collaboration, and audience engagement that impressed their British counterparts. These exchanges suggested that cultural partnership would benefit both regions, with each offering unique strengths and perspectives. King Charles introduced a surprise element during the afternoon program by inviting guests to tour sections of the royal collection that featured historical connections to the Balkan region. The guided tour, led by royal collection curators, revealed artifacts and artworks that documented centuries of connection between Britain and Southeast Europe. Maps from the Ottoman period, diplomatic gifts, and artistic works created by Balkan artists in British collections provided tangible evidence of long-standing cultural connections. The historical perspective added depth to contemporary discussions about cultural collaboration. Guests discovered that current partnership efforts built upon foundations established through centuries of interaction, trade, and diplomatic relationship. This historical context helped frame contemporary cultural exchange as continuation of established traditions rather than entirely new initiatives. During the Royal Collection Tour, several guests made important discoveries about their own cultural heritage. Documents and artifacts revealed previously unknown connections between British and Balkan cultural figures from earlier periods. These findings generated excitement about potential collaborative research projects that could explore historical connections while informing contemporary cultural understanding. The afternoon program also included opportunities for guests to experience British cultural traditions firsthand. Tea ceremonies, traditional British music demonstrations, and discussions about British literary traditions provided cultural context for their hosts while suggesting areas for future cultural exchange. These experiences emphasize the mutual nature of cultural learning, with British representatives eager to share their traditions as enthusiastically as they learned about Balkan cultures. As evening approached, the energy remained high despite the intensive schedule. The depth of connections being formed suggested that this gathering would have lasting impact beyond the immediate diplomatic benefits. Personal relationships were developing between artists, writers, musicians, and political leaders who discovered shared interests and complementary skills that could support future collaboration. The success of the afternoon sessions reflected the careful balance between formal programming and spontaneous interaction. While the structured presentations provided valuable cultural information, the unscripted conversations and impromptu collaborations were generating the most innovative ideas for future partnership. King Charles's informal hosting style encouraged authentic exchanges while maintaining the dignity appropriate for such a significant diplomatic gathering. The afternoon concluded with small group sessions where participants could pursue specific interests in greater detail. These focused discussions allowed for practical planning around concrete collaboration possibilities. By the end of the afternoon, several formal partnership agreements were under discussion, with participants identifying next steps for turning ideas into actionable programs. The regional diversity represented in the gathering had proven to be one of its greatest strengths. Rather than creating tension, the different national perspectives had enriched discussions and suggested multiple approaches to shared challenges. The presence of political leaders alongside cultural figures had facilitated connections between policymakers and the creative communities they served, potentially strengthening support for cultural initiatives in all represented countries. The evening reception transformed the palace's staterooms into a dynamic cultural showcase that allowed guests to experience the richness of Western Balkan traditions while exploring possibilities for contemporary collaboration. Unlike traditional diplomatic receptions, this gathering encouraged active participation, with interactive demonstrations, collaborative performances, and working discussions that engaged every attendee as both contributor and audience. The state dining room featured an extraordinary cultural exhibition organized by the guests themselves. Each delegation had brought representative artifacts, artworks, and cultural materials that told their country's story through tangible objects. Traditional textiles from Albania displayed alongside contemporary jewelry designs from Kosovo. Handcrafted instruments from Bosnia and Herzegovina sat near modern sculptures from North Macedonia. The exhibition created an informal museum that invited exploration and conversation. President Osmani of Kosovo engaged visitors at her delegation's display, where Petrit Halalaj's latest sketches showed his plans for a major installation in London that would explore themes of European identity and belonging. His artwork, which incorporated found objects and childhood memories, resonated with British artists present who had explored similar themes of displacement and home. Their discussions generated ideas for a collaborative exhibition that could travel between British and Balkan cities. The Albanian section attracted considerable attention, particularly Prime Minister Rama's personal artwork displayed alongside traditional crafts. His paintings, created during his years as an artist before entering politics, provided unique insights into Albanian cultural identity and political transformation. British museum directors expressed interest in organizing exhibitions that could showcase the intersection of artistic expression and political leadership in post-communist societies. Goran Bregovic had set up an informal musical laboratory in the White Drawing Room, where traditional Balkan instruments were available for guests to explore. His impromptu lessons on the accordion and tamburica attracted both political leaders and fellow musicians, creating a joyful atmosphere that embodied the evening's spirit of cultural sharing. The king himself attempted to play traditional Serbian melodies. His efforts met with encouraging applause that demonstrated how music could break down formal barriers. The most unexpected collaboration emerged in the picture gallery, where Jasmila Zbanic began discussing her film projects with British documentary makers. Their conversation revealed shared interests in exploring women's experiences during social and political transformation. By evening's end, they had outlined plans for a co-production that would examine women's roles in post-conflict reconstruction across different European contexts. Queen Camilla had organized a special literary corner in the morning room, where authors read excerpts from their works in original languages, followed by English translations. Dubravka Ugrizik's reading from her essay collection about exile and belonging moved listeners to tears, while her discussion with British writers revealed universal themes about identity and cultural belonging that transcended specific historical experiences. The evening's musical highlight occurred when Ermanila Jaho and Boris Trajanov collaborated on an impromptu performance that blended Albanian folk traditions with Macedonian classical compositions. Their collaboration attracted a growing audience as other musicians joined in, creating a spontaneous ensemble that included British classical musicians and traditional Balkan players. The resulting performance demonstrated how different musical traditions could enhance rather than compete with each other. Culinary diplomacy played a significant role in the evening's success, with traditional dishes from each represented country served alongside British specialties. The food stations became gathering points for cultural exchange, with chefs explaining traditional preparation methods and the historical significance of specific dishes. President Đukanović of Montenegro found himself discussing the Mediterranean influences in Balkan cuisine with British food writers, revealing unexpected connections between regional cooking traditions. The evening's informal structure allowed for deeper exploration of collaboration possibilities that had emerged during the day's sessions. Working groups formed around specific projects, with participants exchanging contact information and establishing timelines for follow-up actions. The presence of both political leaders and cultural figures enabled immediate assessment of official support for proposed initiatives. One particularly promising discussion involved establishing artist residency programs between British and Balkan institutions. Zaneta Vangeli outlined how such programs could support emerging artists while facilitating cultural exchange, with British gallery directors expressing enthusiasm for hosting Balkan artists while sending British artists to the region. The conversation revealed strong institutional support for long-term cultural collaboration. Educational partnerships received significant attention during the evening discussions, with university representatives from both regions exploring student exchange programs, joint degree offerings, and collaborative research initiatives. President Pendarovski of North Macedonia shared his country's experiences with educational reform, generating interest from British education leaders in learning from innovative approaches to curriculum development and student engagement. The evening also featured technology demonstrations showing how digital platforms could support cultural preservation and sharing. Young artists and technologists present showcased applications that could document traditional cultural practices, connect diaspora communities with homeland cultures, and create virtual cultural exchanges when physical travel was not possible. These innovations particularly excited political leaders who recognized their potential for maintaining cultural connections across geographic distances. King Charles used the evening reception to announce several concrete outcomes from the day's discussions. A formal cultural partnership agreement was being developed that would establish regular exchanges between British and Western Balkan cultural institutions. Student scholarship programs would provide opportunities for young people from the region to study in Britain, while British students would receive support for cultural studies in Balkan countries. The king also announced plans for an annual cultural festival that would rotate between London and capitals throughout the Western Balkans, providing ongoing opportunities for artistic collaboration and cultural celebration. This festival would showcase contemporary artists alongside traditional cultural expressions, ensuring that cultural exchange would continue evolving rather than remaining static. Economic dimensions of cultural collaboration received attention during evening discussions, with business leaders exploring how cultural partnerships could support broader economic development. Tourism, creative industries, and cultural exports emerged as areas where collaboration could provide mutual benefits while supporting local communities and preserving cultural authenticity. The evening highlighted the role of diaspora communities in maintaining cultural connections. Several guests shared insights about how expatriate communities in Britain maintained connections to their homeland cultures while contributing to British society. These discussions revealed opportunities for diaspora organizations to facilitate ongoing cultural exchange and support emerging artists from their countries of origin. As the formal evening program concluded, many guests continued their conversations in smaller groups throughout the palace's public rooms. The energy remained high despite the long day, suggesting genuine enthusiasm for the connections being formed and projects being planned. The king and queen continued circulating among their guests, demonstrating personal commitment to the relationships being established. The evening's success reflected careful attention to creating an environment where formal diplomatic objectives could be achieved through authentic cultural exchange. Rather than limiting discussions to official talking points, the format encouraged creative thinking and personal connections that could support long-term collaboration beyond immediate political considerations. Media representatives documented the evening's cultural performances and artistic collaborations, ensuring that the broader public could share in the celebration of Western Balkan cultural achievements. The coverage emphasized positive aspects of regional development, while showcasing the sophisticated cultural scenes that had emerged throughout the post-conflict period. The international audience for the event extended beyond immediate participants, with diplomatic representatives from other European countries observing the proceedings with interest. The British approach to cultural diplomacy with the Western Balkans was being watched as a potential model for other international cultural partnership efforts. As the evening concluded, participants expressed appreciation for the opportunity to engage with cultural counterparts from across the region in a setting that encouraged collaboration rather than competition. The presence of political leaders had provided official validation for cultural initiatives, while allowing artists and intellectuals to interact directly with decision-makers who could support their work. The final phase of this historic gathering began with a private breakfast meeting in the palace's Chinese dining room, where King Charles met with each delegation leader individually to discuss specific follow-up actions and long-term vision for British Balkan cultural cooperation. These intimate conversations allowed for detailed planning around the ambitious initiatives that had emerged during the previous day's discussions. President Osmani of Kosovo shared her vision for educational partnerships that could support her country's youngest generation while strengthening international connections. Her discussion with the king focused on scholarship programs that would bring Kosovar students to British universities while providing British students with opportunities to study contemporary European development in Kosovo. The king expressed particular interest in supporting programs that could document Kosovo's rapid transformation since independence. Prime Minister Rama of Albania brought his unique perspective as both political leader and practicing artist to discussions about cultural diplomacy's role in international relations. His conversation with King Charles explored how artistic expression could complement traditional diplomatic efforts, with both leaders recognizing art's power to transcend political boundaries and create emotional connections between peoples. They discussed establishing artist residency programs that would allow Albanian and British artists to work collaboratively on projects addressing shared concerns. President Milanovic of Croatia focused his discussion on historical preservation and contemporary interpretation, recognizing Croatia's position as a bridge between Central Europe and the Balkans. His conversation with the king examined how cultural institutions could present complex historical narratives while promoting understanding and reconciliation. They explored possibilities for joint museum exhibitions that could examine historical connections between Britain and Croatia while addressing contemporary cultural developments. The king's meeting with President Đukanović of Montenegro centered on environmental and cultural preservation, recognizing Montenegro's unique position as a small country with extraordinary natural beauty and rich cultural traditions. Their discussion explored how cultural tourism could support environmental conservation while providing economic opportunities for local communities. The king expressed particular interest in Montenegro's approaches to sustainable development that preserved cultural authenticity. President Penderovsky of North Macedonia brought extensive experience in international relations to his discussion about educational and cultural cooperation. His conversation with the king examined how cultural partnerships could support broader European integration efforts while preserving distinct national identities. They discussed establishing academic centers that could facilitate ongoing research collaboration between British and Macedonian scholars. President Vučić of Serbia engaged in perhaps the most complex discussion, given ongoing regional tensions and Serbia's unique position in European development. His conversation with the king focused on culture's potential to build bridges between communities and nations, recognizing art and education's role in promoting understanding across political divisions. They explored how cultural cooperation could complement broader efforts toward regional stability and prosperity. The breakfast meetings with delegation representatives from Bosnia and Herzegovina addressed the particular challenges of promoting cultural cooperation in a multi-ethnic society. The king demonstrated deep understanding of the country's complex constitutional structure while expressing admiration for cultural figures who had maintained artistic excellence despite challenging circumstances. Their discussions focused on supporting cultural initiatives that could bring together different ethnic communities while respecting diverse traditions. Following these individual meetings, King Charles convened a final plenary session in the throne room where concrete commitments and timelines were established for the various initiatives discussed throughout the gathering. This session transformed the previous day's enthusiastic conversations into actionable plans with specific deadlines and responsible organizations identified for each major project. The centerpiece announcement involved establishing the Western Balkans Cultural Partnership, a formal framework that would coordinate ongoing cooperation between British and regional cultural institutions. This partnership would oversee artist residency programs, student exchanges, collaborative exhibitions, and joint cultural festivals planned for the coming years. The king announced that the partnership would receive dedicated funding from both British sources and participating Balkan countries. Educational cooperation emerged as a priority initiative, with several British universities committing to establish formal partnerships with institutions throughout the Western Balkans. These partnerships would include student exchange programs, joint degree offerings, collaborative research projects, and shared academic conferences. The king emphasized education's importance in building lasting connections between younger generations who would shape future international relationships. The planned annual cultural festival received detailed attention during the final session, with the first festival scheduled for London the following year before rotating to different Balkan capitals in subsequent years. Each festival would showcase contemporary artists alongside traditional cultural expressions, ensuring that cultural exchange would remain dynamic and evolving. Festival programming would include performances, exhibitions, academic conferences, and business networking opportunities. Funding mechanisms for ongoing cultural cooperation received careful consideration, with the king announcing that the British government would provide initial support while encouraging private sector involvement and international development funding for sustainable long-term financing. Participants discussed creating cultural cooperation funds that could support smaller projects and emerging artists who might not have access to major institutional resources. The technology initiatives discussed during the previous day received formal support, with commitments to develop digital platforms that could facilitate ongoing cultural exchange when physical meetings were not possible. These platforms would support virtual artist collaborations, online cultural education programs, and digital preservation of traditional cultural practices. Young technology professionals from both regions would lead these initiatives with guidance from cultural institutions. Media and communication strategies received attention to ensure that the broader public could engage with and benefit from the cultural partnerships being established. Plans included documentary projects, cultural education programs for schools, and public exhibitions that would share Western Balkan cultures with British audiences while introducing British cultural traditions to Balkan communities. The business community's role in supporting cultural cooperation was formally recognized, with several major British companies committing to sponsor cultural initiatives while exploring business opportunities in the Western Balkans. These partnerships would ensure that cultural cooperation could contribute to economic development while maintaining focus on authentic cultural expression rather than commercial exploitation. Diaspora communities received special attention in the final planning discussions, with recognition of their crucial role in maintaining cultural connections and supporting ongoing cooperation efforts. Plans included establishing diaspora advisory committees that could guide cultural programming while ensuring that expatriate communities could contribute to and benefit from cultural partnership initiatives. Environmental considerations were integrated into all cultural cooperation plans, with commitments to sustainable practices in festival organization, travel reduction through digital collaboration platforms, and support for cultural tourism that would contribute to environmental conservation rather than degradation. The king emphasized the importance of ensuring that cultural cooperation modeled responsible approaches to international engagement. As the formal gathering concluded, King Charles delivered closing remarks that emphasized the historic significance of the commitments being made and the potential for cultural cooperation to contribute to broader international peace and understanding. He expressed personal commitment to supporting the initiatives being launched while encouraging participants to maintain the spirit of collaboration and mutual respect that had characterized the entire gathering. The final ceremonial element involved each delegation presenting King Charles with cultural gifts that represented their country's artistic traditions while symbolizing hopes for future cooperation. These presentations provided emotional closure to the intensive discussions while creating lasting reminders of the connections being established. Follow-up coordination was established through the British Council and Foreign Office Cultural Affairs offices, ensuring that the momentum generated during the palace gathering would translate into sustained action. Regular progress reviews were scheduled, with the first major assessment plan for 6 months following the gathering to evaluate initial project implementations and adjust strategies as needed. The gathering's conclusion was marked by informal farewells that demonstrated the genuine personal connections formed during the intensive cultural exchange. Political leaders, artists, writers, and musicians had developed relationships that extended beyond their official roles, creating networks of personal trust that could support ongoing cooperation efforts. The final departure of guests from Buckingham Palace marked the end of an unprecedented diplomatic and cultural gathering that had achieved objectives beyond initial expectations. The combination of formal diplomatic protocols with authentic cultural exchange had created a model for international cooperation that other countries were already expressing interest in replicating. The gathering's impact would extend far beyond immediate participants, with ripple effects reaching cultural communities throughout the Western Balkans and Britain. Educational institutions, cultural organizations, and individual artists would benefit from the partnerships and programs established, while broader public audiences would gain access to new cultural experiences and understanding. The success of King Charles's initiative demonstrated the potential for cultural diplomacy to complement traditional political and economic cooperation while creating lasting bonds between peoples. The personal investment of the royal family in understanding and celebrating Western Balkan cultures had created a foundation for sustained partnership that could weather political changes and continue evolving as relationships deepened over time.